My name is Elias Vance, and I came to the Blackwood Forest seeking silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of the city's clamor, the relentless hum of traffic, the ceaseless chatter of digital life. I was a writer, chasing a deadline and a muse that had gone AWOL, hoping the raw, ancient beauty of the woods would shake something loose. I rented a small, isolated cabin on the fringes of the forest, surrounded by towering pines and a quiet that felt almost sacred. Or perhaps I would come to realize it was the stillness of something ancient and watchful. The Blackwood was vast, a sprawling expanse of dense woodland that stretched for miles, its canopy so thick in places that the forest floor was plunged into perpetual twilight even at midday. The air within its depths was cool and damp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves, wet earth, and the sharp, clean fragrance of pine needles. Sunlight, when it managed to pierce the overhead gloom, fell in fractured, ethereal shafts, illuminating dancing dust motes and highlighting the gnarled roots that snaked across the leaf-strewn ground like the grasping fingers of something buried deep below. The silence here wasn't empty. It was filled with the subtle symphony of nature. The rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant call of birds, the soft sigh of wind through the branches overhead. But sometimes, just sometimes, there were other sounds that didn't belong. Local legends about the Blackwood Forest were plentiful, whispered in hushed tones by the few residents of the nearby hamlet. Tales of lost hikers, strange lights, and a place deep within the woods where things weren't quite right. I dismissed them as folklore, the product of isolation and overactive imaginations. I was a man of logic, of concrete facts and verifiable evidence, but the Blackwood, I would learn, had its own logic, its own horrifying reality. I spent my days hiking, losing myself in the labyrinthine network of trails, my senses sharp, breathing deep the clean, invigorating air. I took photographs, trying to capture the brooding majesty of the ancient trees, their rough bark, like the skin of giants, their branches reaching like skeletal arms towards the sky. It was during one of these extended treks, several miles from the nearest trail marker, that I found it. The trees here grew particularly close, their trunks thick and covered in dark moss, the undergrowth a tangled, impenetrable mess of ferns and thorny bushes. The light was especially dim, creating a perpetual murky gloom. I was pushing through a particularly dense thicket when I stumbled into a small clearing. It wasn't a natural clearing. The trees around its perimeter seemed to have been deliberately felled, their stumps old and weathered. And in the center of this unnatural space, sitting incongruously on the soft, leaf-covered earth, was a room. Just a room. It looked like a single detached room from a house, somehow transported and deposited here. It was roughly 12 by 15 feet, constructed of dark, weathered wood, the planks warped and faded. There was no roof visible, only a flat, gray surface that looked like aged concrete. A single window, its glass opaque with grime and spiderwebs, was set into one wall. And a door, also made of dark wood, stood slightly ajar, revealing only impenetrable darkness within. There were no signs of foundations, no connecting walls, no indication of how it got here or what it had been part of. It simply was. A room, sitting alone in the heart of the ancient forest. My initial reaction was confusion, quickly followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated curiosity. Who built this? Why was it here? How did it get here? It looked old, impossibly old, as if it had been sitting in this clearing for decades, maybe longer. I circled the structure cautiously, the crackle of dry leaves under my boots the only sound. The wood felt rough and cold to the touch. The air around the room felt different too, heavier, colder, somehow less vibrant than the surrounding forest. Peering through the grimy window was useless. The glass was too dirty, too dark. The open door beckoned, a black rectangle against the faded wood. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at me to turn around, to leave this strange, unsettling place and never look back. But the writer in me, the part that craved novelty, mystery, and the thrill of the unknown, was already halfway across the threshold. Taking a deep breath that tasted of damp earth and apprehension, I pushed the door open further and stepped inside. The darkness within was absolute, deeper than any shadow I had ever encountered. My flashlight beam cut through it like a lifeline. The first thing that struck me was the smell. The smell of dust and decay, certainly, but also that same unsettling sweetness I had encountered at the Grand Obsidian layered with something else, something sharp and metallic like ozone or burnt copper. The air was bone-chillingly cold, colder than the autumn air outside, an unnatural cold that seemed to seep directly into my marrow. The room was sparsely furnished. Against one wall sat a single high-backed armchair, its fabric faded to an unidentifiable color and covered in a thick layer of dust. Opposite it, a small, round wooden table held nothing but a thick coating of grime. In one corner lay a scattering of what looked like children's building blocks, old and discolored. The floor was covered in the same dark, warped wood as the walls. The walls themselves were bare, save for a few patches where the wood seemed darker, almost stained. My flashlight beam traced the perimeter of the room. The ceiling was low, made of the same grey material as the exterior roof. It felt solid, oppressive. There were no other doors, no windows apart from the one I had seen from outside, which, from this side, looked like a square of solid blackness. It didn't seem to connect to the outside world at all. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced its way down my spine. I ran my hand along the wall near the door. The wood felt rough, dry, yet subtly vibrated under my touch, a faint, almost imperceptible hum. I looked back at the doorway I had entered through. It was still there, a black rectangle leading back to the muted light of the clearing. Relief washed over me. Okay, just a strange, abandoned room. Probably part of an old logging camp or something, though its detached nature made no sense. Stepping back towards the entrance, my boot crunched on something on the floor. I directed my flashlight down. It was a child's shoe, small and worn, half buried in the dust. A single tiny shoe. Another wave of unease. I took another step towards the door. My hand was almost on the frame when I felt a sudden, intense pressure against my back as if someone had shoved me hard. I stumbled forward, catching myself on the doorframe. I spun around, flashlight beam sweeping across the room, empty. Nothing. The armchair, the table, the blocks, the shoe, that was all. My heart pounded in my chest. Imagination? The unsettling atmosphere getting to me, or was I not alone? The air in the room seemed to have grown heavier, the silence more profound. The faint hum in the walls seemed to have intensified. I took a shaky step back towards the doorway. As my foot crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang that echoed horribly in the confined space. I froze, every muscle tense. Panic flared, hot and sharp. I spun around, fumbling for the door handle, my hands shaking. It was cold, smooth metal. I turned it, but it didn't budge. It was locked. From the outside, or from the inside. I pounded on the door with my fists. "Hello, is anyone there? Let me out!" My voice sounded thin, desperate, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. There was no response, only the fading echo of my own cries. I backed away from the door, directing my flashlight beam around the room again, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The simple furniture now seemed menacing, shrouded in shadow. The child's shoe on the floor looked less like a lost item and more like a grim marker. I tried the door again, kicking it this time, shoulder slamming against the wood. It was solid, unyielding. It felt as if it had been sealed from the outside, or worse, had become one with the wall itself. I was trapped. The temperature in the room dropped further, the cold now biting. Painful. My breath plumed in the air. The faint hum in the walls intensified, rising in pitch, a low, resonant vibration that I could feel in my teeth. The air began to smell strongly of that burnt copper, like an overloaded electrical circuit. Then the shadows began to move independently of my flashlight beam, not just shifting as the light moved, but coiling, stretching, reaching. They seemed to detach from the walls, becoming three-dimensional, vaguely humanoid shapes writhing at the edges of my vision. Whispers started again, but these were different from the indistinct murmurs of the forest or the hotel. These were closer, clearer, yet still jumbled and chaotic, a chorus of overlapping voices, male and female, young and old, speaking at once, too fast to understand. Fear, naked and raw, gripped me. This wasn't just an abandoned room. It was something else, something alive, something that had been waiting. The furniture in the room seemed to subtly rearrange itself when my back was turned. I'd look away for a second, and when I looked back, the armchair would be closer to the center of the room. The table shifted a few inches. The building blocks on the floor seemed to increase in number, and the child's shoe, it was now sitting on top of the table facing me, as if placed there deliberately. The whispers intensified, growing louder, more distinct, though still a jumbled cacophony. But now, individual words began to pierce through the noise. Stay, don't leave, ours. And beneath those chilling invitations, a current of pain, of agony, of profound sadness. My flashlight beam flickered, then dimmed. Panic surged. I shook it violently, but it was dying. The darkness pressed in. The shadows grew bolder, no longer confined to the periphery, but drifting closer, swirling around me like dark smoke. I leaned my back against the furthest wall from the door, trying to make myself small, trying to disappear. The wood against my back felt cold, vibrating with that unsettling hum. I could feel the presence of the shadows around me, cold and heavy, like bodies pressed close in a confined space. Then a new sound, a wet, dragging noise coming from the darkest corner of the room, slow, deliberate, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. My blood ran cold. My flashlight died completely, plunging the room into absolute suffocating darkness. The scraping sound continued, growing closer. I could hear shallow, ragged breathing that wasn't my own. The air was thick with the smell of burnt copper and something else. Something foul and organic, like rotting meat. I scrambled away from the wall, blindly fumbling in the darkness, trying to find the door again. My hands hit the cold, unyielding wood. I hammered on it, screaming, but my voice was a choked, useless sound in the terrifying blackness. Something brushed against my leg, cold and trailing. I recoiled with a cry, kicking out wildly. My foot connected with something soft, then hard. A low moan echoed from the darkness. The whispers returned, louder than ever, swirling around me, pressing in on my mind. They were no longer just jumbled voices. They were distinct, agonizing cries for help, interwoven with guttural growls and chilling laughter. I could feel them, these unseen entities all around me, their cold presence brushing against my skin. A faint light began to emanate from the corner where I had heard the scraping sound. It was a sickly greenish luminescence, just enough to reveal a hint of movement, a hulking, indistinct shape shifting in the shadows. The scraping sound intensified, accompanied by a wet sucking noise. The room itself seemed to groan around me, the wooden walls creaking and shifting. The floor felt uneven under my feet, as if the very ground beneath the room was moving. The temperature dropped even further, past cold, into something that felt like absolute zero, burning my skin. Then, in the greenish light, I saw something else. On the wall opposite me, stains began to appear, dark and spreading, forming shapes that vaguely resembled contorted faces, screaming in silent agony. The dark patches on the wood that I had noticed earlier were becoming more defined, swirling and merging like wet paint. The entity in the corner moved fully into the faint light. It was large, vaguely humanoid, but its limbs seemed twisted, elongated. Its head was tilted, and I could make out 2 points of greenish light where eyes should be, staring directly at me. The stench of decay and burnt copper was overwhelming, suffocating. It shuffled towards me, the scraping sound deafening in the confined space. Its movement was jerky, unnatural, like a broken marionette being dragged by unseen strings. I backed away, stumbling over the child's blocks on the floor, falling hard onto my back. The fall knocked the wind out of me. I lay there, gasping, staring up into the darkness, seeing only the faint green glow of the entity's eyes advancing. The whispers were a deafening roar in my mind now, 1,000 voices screaming in unison. It loomed over me, its form blocking out the faint light. The smell was unbearable. I could feel its cold, palpable presence pressing down on me. I closed my eyes, bracing for whatever was coming. A sudden, sharp pain in my chest. It felt like something had pierced me, deep and agonizing. I screamed, arching my back, my cry swallowed by the cacophony of voices in my head. The pain was blinding, radiating outwards, stealing my breath, and then nothing. Silence. Utter, complete silence. The whispers stopped. The scraping stopped. The smell faded. The crushing weight lifted. I lay there, gasping, my chest burning, expecting death. But it didn't come. Tentatively, I opened my eyes. The darkness was still absolute, but it felt different. It wasn't the oppressive, malevolent blackness from before, it was just darkness. The cold remained, but it was the cold of an empty, unheated space, not the soul-chilling cold of something ancient and hungry. I pushed myself up slowly, my body aching, my chest burning with a dull, persistent pain. I ran my hand over my chest, feeling for a wound, for blood. Nothing. My shirt was intact. There was no puncture, no cut, but the pain was real, deep within. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. It was dead, the screen dark, useless. Using the wall as a guide, I slowly made my way back to where I thought the door was. My hands traced the rough wood. I found the handle. I turned it. It opened. It simply opened, silently, smoothly. The black rectangle of the doorway was there, leading out into the muted gray light of the clearing. The faint scent of pine and wet earth drifted in. It was over. Whatever had happened, whatever that thing was, it was gone. Or had it left me? Stepping outside, I stood in the clearing, shivering, gasping for air. The forest felt different now. It wasn't just ancient, it felt violated, disturbed. I looked back at the room. It sat there, silent and unassuming, looking exactly as it had when I first found it. A simple wooden structure, sitting alone in a clearing in the woods. Could it have all been in my head, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the unsettling atmosphere? But the pain in my chest was real. The fear that still clawed at my throat was real. The memory of the scraping sound, the smell, the glowing eyes, too vivid, too terrifyingly real to be a mere figment of my imagination. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran. I ran blindly through the trees, crashing through the undergrowth, not caring about the scratches or the uneven ground. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that place. I made it back to my cabin hours later, disoriented and exhausted. I collapsed onto the floor, trembling. The image of the entity burned into my mind. I stayed up all night, lights on, huddled in a chair, jumping at every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside. The next morning, I packed my car with frantic speed, leaving the cabin keys on the table. I didn't care about the deadline, the muse, the money I'd paid for the rental. I just needed to get away. As I drove down the winding road away from the Blackwood forest, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The tree line was a dark, imposing wall against the sky. I couldn't see the clearing, couldn't see the room, but I knew it was there, waiting. I left the town, left the state, left that part of my life behind. I tried to resume my normal routine, tried to write, tried to forget. But the Blackwood forest and the room within it had left an indelible mark. The pain in my chest lingered for days, a dull ache that no painkiller could touch. And the silence. The silence was the worst, because now the absence of sound didn't feel like peace. It felt like a void, waiting to be filled by the whispers I knew were always just beneath the surface. I stopped writing. I couldn't focus. Every time I tried to sit down and type, I saw the darkness of the room, felt the oppressive cold, heard the distant scraping sound in my mind. The faces on the walls, the single child's shoe, the porcelain doll, they were etched into my memory. The nightmares returned, worse than anything I had experienced before. They were vivid, visceral, filled with the stench of decay and the terror of being trapped in absolute darkness with that thing. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the feeling of those cold hands grasping at me still lingering. I became withdrawn, isolated. Friends and family noticed the change, the haunted look in my eyes. I couldn't tell them. How could I? Who would believe me? That I found a room that wasn't a room, deep in a forest, and was attacked by something that defied description. I started researching again, this time not for a story, but for answers. I scoured old forums, dusty books on folklore and the paranormal, local histories of the region around the Blackwood forest. I found fragmented accounts, old rumors, mentions of people who went into the woods and never came back, tales of a dead spot deep within the forest where compasses spun wildly and people felt an overwhelming sense of dread. One cryptic old journal entry spoke of a place of convergence, a tear in the veil, a place where the boundaries between worlds were thin and things could slip through. And I found mentions of the Blackwood family, not just Elias and Silas, the builders of haunted properties, but a lineage with a long, disturbing history of involvement in the occult, of strange experiments and darker practices stretching back centuries. It seemed their family legacy wasn't just building structures, but somehow interacting with forces that lay beyond the veil of normal reality. The hotels, the room in the forest, they weren't just locations, they were instruments, anchors for something ancient and malevolent. The pain in my chest occasionally flared, a sharp, stabbing sensation that took my breath away. It felt like something was still there, a splinter of that entity's touch, a lingering connection to the room. I started to notice other things. Shadows seemed deeper around me, even in brightly lit rooms. The air would sometimes grow suddenly cold for no reason. I felt a persistent, unsettling sense of being observed even when I was alone. The terror of that night in the room had changed me fundamentally. It had stripped away my skepticism, my rational facade, leaving me exposed to a reality I never knew existed. A reality where ancient evils lurked just beyond the edges of our perception, waiting for an opening. One evening, months later, I was sitting alone in my apartment, the windows dark, the streetlights casting long shadows into the room. The air grew cold. That burnt copper smell, faint but unmistakable, filled the air. The silence deepened, becoming heavy, charged. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from the corner of the room. My blood ran cold. It had followed me, or perhaps I had brought it with me. I knew with chilling certainty that my encounter with the room in the Blackwood Forest was not over. I had survived, yes, but I had not escaped. The room, or the entity within it, had found a way to reach me. It had marked me. I live with it now. The fear is a constant companion. The scraping sound comes and goes, sometimes faint, sometimes startlingly close. The cold follows me. The shadows seem to watch. I know it's waiting, watching for its moment, for me to let my guard down, for the connection, the mark it left on me, to become strong enough. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants. But I know that it originated from that room in the forest, that place of inexplicable presence and horrifying secrets. And I know that I am forever tied to it, a living echo of the terror I encountered there. The Blackwood Forest holds its secrets deep within its silent, shadowed heart. And some secrets, once disturbed, refuse to stay buried. I am a testament to that. I am Elias Vance, and I am still in the room, even when I'm not. The end, for now, or is it ever truly the end?